Hello, welcome to Yash. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for accepting to have this interview with us. And like in any beginning, I suggest you introduce yourself to our viewers. So who is Paul Kingsnorth?
That's the big question, isn't it? Well, I'm an English writer. I've lived in England most of my life, although I live in Ireland now. And most of my life I've spent writing. I've written I think I've written 9 books now. And most of the writing that I've done, whether it's fiction, I've written 3 novels, or poetry, or essays, I've been writing about our relationship with nature and with culture in the modern world. So I'm a writer, I'm an Englishman, I live in Ireland with my family, and very recently I've become an Orthodox Christian.
Nice. So you're talking about writing. When did this passion for writing emerge? How did you discover it?
Well, it's a good question, really. Ever since I can remember, I've loved reading. Passion for writing always starts from reading. You love books as a child. I spent most of my childhood just reading as many books as I could find, reading everything I could get my hand on, reading the back of a cereal packet if there was nothing else to read. So I think that just naturally became writing. If you love words, you start to write to see if you can do it. And I've always written since as long as I can remember. It's the way that I can express myself and understand what the world is. And so when I was an adult, I just decided to see if I could make a living doing that. And I've just always done it. But even if I wasn't making a living doing it, I would be doing it anyway, because if you're a writer, you can't stop writing. I think that's the definition of a writer.
Right.
You just have to do it.
You can't help it.
No, exactly.
You're quite an interesting person, and I find your journey quite amazing, to be honest. So you practiced Zen Buddhism and Daoism, but you confessed in an interview that there was always something missing. So what was it there that was not enough? What was it that you did not find in all these religious movements?
Well, I think now that all of my life I've been on a spiritual search, like a lot of people, looking for truth, even though I didn't necessarily know that's what I was doing. And I never put that in religious terms. I didn't grow up in a religious household. I didn't have Christian parents or religious parents at all. And I come from a country which is very irreligious. Britain is not anti-religious, it just doesn't care. So there's no real certainly amongst most people, there's no framework for thinking about the sacred or about the divine or about God or any of those things, really. So all of my life I had, I think, a sort of itch, a sense that there was something missing, that there was something I was looking for, and I didn't really know what it was. And I looked all through everything. I looked in politics, and I looked in activism, and I looked in philosophy and in writing. And as you said, for the last 10 years especially, I've been looking specifically in religious movements. So I practiced Zen Buddhism for 5 or 6 years. I was sort of a neo-pagan for a while, and I've read mythology, and I've been on retreats, and I was always looking for something. But when I practiced Buddhism for 5 or 6 years, and it's a powerful practice, Buddhism. There's a lot of truth in it, especially in the understanding of the self. But I became aware that what I was looking for I couldn't find there, and I became aware uncomfortably, because I didn't want this to be true. I thought I was looking for God.
Right.
And I didn't really like the word God, because you don't in the modern world, and I didn't really know what it meant. But I knew that there was something intelligent, I think, behind it all, and I wasn't seeing it in Zen. Buddhism is very much about nothingness.
Right.
So you don't approach God, you can't see God as we might understand it in Orthodoxy. So although there were benefits in that, there was something missing from it, and I was still looking for it. Speaking
of God, when did you say that you first met God?
How can you explain that question? How can you answer that? I think when I was young, I loved nature. I was a great lover of the natural world. I did my dad used to take me on long trips into the countryside, lots of camping, walking in the mountains. And so I had this spiritual relationship with nature. And I think actually that was how I first met God, but I would never have said it like that. I first met God through creation, and I think I still do. But the first time I understood, I think, that I was really looking for God was when I was practicing Zen, and then later when I started to practice for a short period of time, I was practicing a kind of neo-pagan religion, because I wanted a nature religion, and I was looking for God there, but I didn't find God there either, because that was an invented modern religion that people have created to try and connect to God through nature. So, but I really started to become aware when I was doing that, because I was praying at the same time, and I was saying, you know, God, if you're there, show me what you are. Show me. A lot of people end up doing this. They say, okay, God, if you're real, show me what's true. Show me where I should go. Show yourself to me and show me what I should do, right? And so I was doing that, and I actually started having dreams about Christ, and then I started strange things were happening to me, and I felt like I was being really pulled away from what I was doing. And I started feeling like I was being pulled towards Christianity, and it had never occurred to me to be Christian. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't anti-Christian, but I didn't think that there was, I didn't think that was the truth. But I really did start to feel I was being taken towards Christ. I was having dreams. I was having lots of experiences. Lots of Christians were suddenly writing to me and talking to me, and I was discovering that friends I'd had for a long time were Christian, and they'd been quiet about it. So I felt like I was being assailed on all sides by Christians, and I was being pursued. I really felt like I was being pursued. I felt like I'd asked God to show me what was true, and then kind of Christ appeared, and I was being pursued by Christianity, and I sort of resisted it for a while. I thought, no, this can't be true. And then I thought, well, maybe it is, because this is what I asked for. So I think that was maybe 5 years or so ago, and I felt like, okay, this is what I have to go and explore now. This is where I'm being taken.
Was there any kind of spark, so to say, that led you to convert to Orthodoxy? Any distinct moment that you would identify as?
I don't know if there was a distinct moment. It was more of a process. I accepted that I was going to be Christian. I accepted that this was the truth now. And then I said, well, what does that mean? I live in Ireland. Ireland is a Catholic country. I come from England. It's an Anglican country. It's a Protestant country. And then there are other churches too. So what's the church? So then I was praying again, and I was saying, okay, what's the church? What do I do? Should I join a church? Can I be a Christian on my own? Being a Western person, I'm very individualistic. So I wanted to be a Christian on my own for a while, and I discovered you can't do that. So then I was asking to be sent to the church, and I was exploring. I was going to Catholic churches. I've been to masses. I was reading about all the different churches. And the more I read about Orthodoxy, and the more I spoke to some people I knew who were Orthodox actually in the West, the more I discovered something in Orthodoxy that is not in Western Christianity. And I didn't know anything about the Orthodox Church at all. Although my grandmother was Greek and she was Orthodox. My grandmother was Greek Cypriot, so actually I have it in my blood. But I didn't know anything about it. But the more I explored Orthodoxy, the more I thought there was a real depth of mysticism and a depth of prayer, especially in the tradition of the prayer of the heart. Right. And I felt that there was a real sense in which the Orthodox Church had guarded the tradition in a way that the Western churches have not. Western churches have become very worldly. They've tried to adapt to the world. They've said, oh, the world is very modern, so we must become modern as well to speak to people, which is, it's an understandable reaction in one sense, but actually what it's done is it's made the church look like it has no center. The church just looks like part of the modern world. And I think that the Orthodox Church is prepared to say, well, this is the teaching, and the teaching doesn't change. But also that in places like Mount Athos, the holy mountain, and in some of the monasteries here in Romania, which I visited, there is such a deep tradition of prayer and monastic depth that is just not in the Catholic Church, it's not in the Anglican Church. It used to be in the Western churches as well, but it's not anymore. And so there's something in Orthodoxy that I could see that we haven't got in the West anymore. And it showed me a kind of Christianity that I'd never seen. Because in the West, when you learn about Christianity, it's really just a set of moral rules. So Jesus says, do this, and you don't do that. And then you go to heaven instead of going to hell. But there's not the practice in the same way. The spiritual connection, the depth of prayer, the understanding that there's a relationship at the heart of it. And so learning about Orthodoxy is very revealing to me and to quite a lot of other Western people I've spoken to. They say, I didn't know Christianity was like this. So that was when I started to see that. And then when I went to the first Divine Liturgy, it was very powerful. And I said, I've never seen anything like this in a church, so this is where I have to keep coming. So that was that.
Right. And you converted.
I converted, yeah. Well, I don't know if I converted, because here's what I didn't convert. It was more like I discovered I'd always been Christian. You know, I discovered that this was something that felt natural. It's very strange. When I became a member of the church, people said to me, they said, "Welcome home." It's a very strange thing to say to an Englishman who's gone into the Romanian church, because in one sense it's not home at all. But it did feel like home. You know, it did feel like I'd come back to a kind of a natural state that I got lost from. And a lot of other people have said something similar that to me as well, and I've heard other people say the same, that it feels like it's not exactly a conversion, it's just a return to your natural state. That's what it felt like. So it felt like a blessing, actually.
How did your family take this decision of yours to join Orthodoxy?
Well, luckily, my close family are very supportive. My wife is not Christian, but she is very religious and very supportive of the you know, she's a believer in God, although not an Orthodox one. So my close family, my wife and my children, were quite supportive. That, you know, they'd seen me searching around in all sorts of different traditions for 10 years and meditating and going on retreats. So they knew I was in that place. So they were very supportive. There were other members of my family who were less, I'm not going to say less understanding, but they were just, sometimes it takes time to explain to people what's happened. If you become a Christian and you've never been a Christian before, especially an Orthodox Christian, which is a very strange thing in the West, because people don't even know what it means, right? They just say, "Oh, are those the guys with the big beards in Greece? You know, what's that? Why have you done that?" So there wasn't hostility, but there were some people in my family who were just a bit confused. And so I had to explain it to them and give them things to read. But actually everyone's come around to understanding what I've done, and understanding why. And there's a real sense in the West, in where I come from, there's a great spiritual void. People are really, just like people everywhere, they sort of need God, they need truth. They can't find it in the church. There's nothing that's replaced the church, really. So a lot of people are seeking, but they don't know where to look. And they think that if you go to Christianity, you've gone backwards, you know, or you've gone to something weird, or you've joined a cult. But it's because they don't know what it is. And that was exactly the position I was in. People don't really know what real Christianity is. And when you tell them, when you give them something to read, by, say, one of the church fathers, or you give them a modern book about Orthodoxy, and they read it, and they say, "Wow, I didn't know that." So actually people have been very supportive in the end. It's even people who were a bit mystified to start with have I think, understood what I'm up to.
Since we are talking about family, how would you synthesize in a few words the mission and the importance of the family in the contemporary society?
That's a big question, isn't it? Well, I think that to talk about the West again, I can't really talk about anything else, because that's all I know. We're a very, very individualistic society. So we have removed, the modern project has been to glorify the individual.
Right.
So we remove everything that gets in the way of individual desire, because we think that's freedom. And we think that if we have as much individual freedom as possible, then we'll all be happy, right? So if I can do exactly what I want in the world and be anything I want to be, then I will be happy. But it doesn't work. We can see that it doesn't work. Actually, what it leads to is real division and unhappiness. We're a very individualistic society. But that's meant that we have to, if the family gets in our way, we move beyond the family. If the church gets in our way, we move beyond the church. We move beyond community. So we end up breaking down everything except the individual in the world. And then we discover that we're deeply unhappy, because we needed community and nature and family and local community, and we need God, so we need a religious community as well. All of the ways that people have always lived are things that speak to what we need. So the family in where I come from has been very downgraded. It's people still, you know, obviously people still have families and it's still important to people, but it's not at the heart of the culture. And I think that's a great loss, actually. I like the Orthodox attitude and the traditional Christian attitude to the family. I like the importance that's given to that, and people should appreciate that, because once you start to break down those things, you end up very lost.
Right. In a short biography of yours, it is written that lately you have explored the increasingly fractured relationship between people, nature, and culture in the modern world. What does this exploration mean more precisely? What does it involve?
Well, really, that's what I've always explored. That's been my whole work. All of my life, that's what all of my books are about, in different ways. I don't know why. It's just what I can't help looking at. And as I said, I feel like the modern culture is very broken. We're broken away from the things which naturally give us meaning. We're broken away from the divine, we're broken away from nature, we're broken away from human culture and kind of roots through time. And we're just made these very individualistic, consumerist, technological people who sort of seek liberation. And I've always felt since I was a child that there's something really broken about that. And I suppose I've just always wanted to know what it is and why we've done it. And I think that what we've done, as I said, in the modern world is we've sought something we call liberation. Mm-hmm. And that means liberation from all tradition and from all limits and from nature itself. And we're now going into a stage in human development where we're going to try and use technology to liberate us from our body. That's what I was talking about last night, the transhumanist desire. So we have this, we've made a big mistake in believing that liberation and freedom are the same thing. And what I discovered through becoming Orthodox is you discover your true freedom by following God. Actually, if you follow the path that's laid down, which is the path you were made for, paradoxically, even though you're supposedly following a set of rules, you feel much more free and alive as an individual than if you're out there trying to create the whole world yourself. And so I've always just felt that there was something really wrong with what we were doing, and I didn't really know what it was, and I've always just tried to work it out. That's really what my writing has been, I think. I'm still not sure I've worked it out, but I'm closer than I was.
So maybe to further elaborate on this idea, what is it precisely that you found in Orthodoxy apart from this freedom that you have just mentioned? Was there anything else that you found in Orthodoxy?
Well, like I said, I think that the heart of the faith for me, the bit that attracts me most and speaks to me most, is the hesychast tradition, the prayer of the heart, the ascetic tradition. I'm not an ascetic, as you can see. I'm not making any claims for myself, but the things that speak to me are the tradition of, say, the Desert Fathers, the traditions of the Holy Mountain, the traditions of the early Christian monks and saints of Ireland and England, where I come from, and in Romania here. It's the same tradition of this great, simple connection to creation and to Creator, and this life of prayer, which is an incredible ancient mystical tradition which can connect you to Christ and connect you to God. And as I said, that's not really present in Western Christianity. And that to me is so attractive, and it's something I really want to deepen my relationship with. And as I said, you know, I'm not making any claims about that, but I'd like to keep walking slowly towards that, because that's such a powerful tradition, and it's so, to me, it seems like a sane alternative to the way that we're living now. You know, this kind of simple love of God and love of creation is right at the heart of the tradition from the beginning, and the Orthodox path has safeguarded that in a way that I find really important. I think that's something that Orthodoxy can really offer to the world. We have safeguarded this tradition for 2,000 years, and people need it now, and they're going to need it more and more as the world goes crazier.
So, speaking of creation, what led you to be involved in the ecological crisis, and why did you decide that it's important to bring your contribution in this field? Since, I mean, you are a writer, but you also chose to be an environmental activist.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about when I was a child. I loved nature. I've always loved it. It's not a political thing or an intellectual proposition. It's just a really deep connection to the natural world. And I think that's how I best see God. I think you can see God through creation. You go through creation to the Creator. Metropolitan Callistos wrote a whole article about that once. It was very good. Gave a whole talk about that, which he called Through Creation to the Creator. It's a great way of understanding God. If God is an artist, I think God is an artist. Creation is his artwork. So how do we understand the Creator? Through the creation, and we're part of the artwork. So I've always had this great love of nature, and because of that, it's painful to see it destroyed. And we're living in this culture now which just is immensely destructive of creation. We see the whole of the natural world as just this resource that we can exploit so that we can get richer. It's the opposite of what any Christian should be doing, seems to me. It's the opposite of everything Christ teaches about how you should be living.
Right.
And so I've always just felt that very passionately long before I had a Christian understanding of it. But now that I am a Christian, I simply see it in those terms. If in the book of Genesis, it tells us that we were put in the garden to tend and keep it. Okay, so we're supposed to be stewards of the place. We're supposed to tend and keep the garden. We're like almost God's representatives in creation. So if you're put in a garden to tend and keep it, you don't destroy the garden.
Right.
Okay, it's not going to make God happy. So I've always written about that, and I've always wanted to know why we do this and how we can stop doing this. And I came to the understanding that it's actually a spiritual question. Our relationship with nature is like our relationship with each other. It's a spiritual question fundamentally. We have to have the right spiritual relationship with it. We have really badly the wrong one at the moment.
You mentioned the book of Genesis. I will mention the book of Revelation now. Because in that book, we read that God ordered people not to harm the earth, the sea, nor the trees. So can we state that God is the first ecologist?
It's a good way of putting it, isn't it? Yeah. Well, God is the only ecologist in that sense. I think exactly that. Like I just said, if this is the creation of God, and we claim to love God, we have to love the creation. And if we don't love the creation, and if we're specifically ordered to protect the creation and we decide to destroy it instead to get rich quickly. And let's remember all the things that Christ told us about wealth as well, and what happens to the rich man who can't enter the kingdom of heaven, specifically all the time telling us to live simply and live meekly, and blessed are the poor and blessed are the meek, and woe to you who are rich. If you decide you're going to destroy God's creation in order to get rich, what do we think God's judgment about that's going to be? It doesn't seem to me like it's going to be good. It feels instinctively wrong to me, and I think it feels instinctively wrong to most people to destroy, say, an ancient forest, to turn it into paper so that we can just play effectively. That's what we do, and it's a tragedy. I think it's going to end badly if we don't change our relationship with it.
Could you give us some practical advice on how each of us at home, at work, at school, we could contribute to the protection of the environment?
Well, the danger of giving advice is that people think that I'm therefore somebody they should be copying, which they shouldn't. I wouldn't set myself up as anything, but all I would say is, again, if we listen to, say, the environment movement now, it tells us that we should reduce our impact on things all the time, which is quite true. We should do that. And I think, again, that is a Christian teaching. I think it's the ascetic tradition. If I read the lives of the Desert Fathers, I see people who are refusing to own anything at all. There's a great story from the Desert Fathers where two fathers are walking through the desert, and one of them sees a piece of cloth on the floor. And he says, oh, that might be useful, and he picks it up, and the other one says to him, why are you doing that? Put it back down, you're too rich. So it's an extreme example of Christian asceticism. Most of us are not going to be desert fathers. But there's still a sense all the way through the tradition, and in other religious traditions, as far as I know, it's always the same, that living simply and rejecting vanity. This is not just a Christian tradition, this is pretty much every faith tradition. It says this is actually how you're supposed to live, and we're not really living like that. So I think we do need to live like that, but we also have to have the love of creation as well, because it's not enough just to say, oh, I mustn't do X, Y, and Z. We have to know why we mustn't do it. And so, just trying to live in that as ascetically as we can, and spending as much time in nature as we can, getting out of the city, getting away from the screen, all of that puts us back in touch with what we're actually supposed to be, which is people in a garden, away from our own creations with the screens glaring in our faces all day. And just the more contact we have with nature, the more we're going to understand it, the more we want to protect it. You only want to protect something you love, right? Yes. So you have to love it. It's not good enough just to say, oh, I mustn't put carbon into the atmosphere. You have to love nature, because then you want to protect it. So the more time you spend in it, the more time you will love it, and the more time your children spend in it. That's really important if you have children, to get them into the natural world as much as possible, just so they can be part of it. I think that's a really important thing.
Now, what about the church? How could the church get involved more in the management of the ecological crisis? What could it do more precisely?
Well, again, I think I hesitate to give advice to the church, but since you ask, I will. I would say two things. Firstly, I think that the more the church can emphasize the traditions we've just talked about, the ascetic tradition, the teachings of Genesis and Revelation, the teachings of Christ. These are all right at the root of Christianity. They're not new things the church has to start doing. You know, some people talk as if the church suddenly has to become green, as if that were a new thing. But it's not a new thing. It seems to me that that's right at the heart of Christian living. If you live as Christ told you to live, you can't destroy the earth. You won't, because you're living as Christ told you to live, which is meek and humble. You know, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, right? You walk, when he tells people where to go, how to spread the word, he tells them to go out with just a staff and one pair of shoes, go from door to door, have no money, right. You know, live a very simple life, no possessions. I mean, this is the radical Christian message, which most of us Christians are not doing, if we're honest, including me. We're not going around with no possessions and having nowhere to lay their heads. Now, of course, for most people that isn't practical. But we still have to understand that that's the aim, that's the way we're walking. So I think that when the church teaches this, it doesn't have to come up with new messages about climate change or ecology. It just has to teach that what's there already. You know, so maybe just an emphasis on that. To me, the really powerful Christian idea is that what Christ teaches is actually the answer to the crisis we're in. And we're in the crisis we're in because we haven't done what he teaches. So how can we start doing it? I mean, this is the question the church has been asking for 2,000 years. It's not a new question. And in that sense, it's not a new crisis. We're just doing what we've always done, but it's more extreme. And I think also in a practical sense, the church could just look at the way it operates, I suppose. You know, is it using disposable cups for all of the services? Is it flying people around the world all the time? Is it recycling? Is it trying to if it's providing food, is the food ethically sourced, or is it from battery farms? All of these kinds of things really matter, because people are only going to listen to the church if the church lives the way it teaches. So you can't be preaching about asceticism and then living a middle-class life, which is true of all of us. I can't be doing that either. So, but as I said, I think that the answer to this is right at the heart of the existing tradition. You don't have to invent anything. I think that's really important.
You know, every year at the beginning of the church year, on the 1st of September, we celebrate what we call the World Day of Prayer for the protection of the creation. This was a day which was instituted 33 years ago by Patriarch Demetrius I of Constantinople. How do you think Christians should spend this day? What should they do?
Well, I didn't know about that day, so I've learned something there. I think Christians should spend that day outside. I think, and I'm going to do that now that I know the date. I'm really struck by the fact that every Sunday is supposed to be a day of rest. So on Sunday we're supposed to do nothing, which I'm not usually very good at. But you know, you have this idea that Sunday you dedicate the day to God. So if you have a day dedicated to creation, you should spend the day in creation. You know, even if you can only go into your garden or go to the park in the city. But if you can go further, go for a picnic, go camping, depending on where you live. If, as I said earlier, if you can spend time in creation, take your family into it. And just, you know, I've had the most beautiful times of my life just in the hills, by the sea, sometimes with my family, sometimes with friends, sometimes on my own. There's a great kind of calm, still beauty in creation. And as I said, you need to go and see it. So I would spend that day outside, even if it's raining.
Nice. So now you live in a rural area in Galway, Ireland, where you have a farm and you work the land there using traditional methods. How does the community perceive you? How do your friends, family members see this way of living?
Well, I have a 2 or 3 acres of land, so it's a small holding rather than a farm. And we try and grow as much of our food as we can. And we grow fuel for our fire, and we have some hens and ducks, and we try to, as I said, manage it as traditionally as we can. It's very much, it's almost quite a normal thing in Ireland. A lot of people have moved to Ireland from other parts of Europe, England, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, all sorts of other people, specifically to go and live more simply. So we chose to leave England, where we were living in towns and cities, and just live a different life, homeschool our children, try and grow as much as we can. We're not from a farming background, so I'm not a farmer. But there's a big tradition, I think, in Western countries which are very urbanized, like England, because it's a very urbanized country. It was the first urban country in the world. England has been majority urban since 1850. So there's been a trend for a long time for some people anyway to want to go out and get out of the city and try and become self-sufficient again. So in a sense, it's not exactly a normal thing to do, but it's not uncommon either in places like rural Ireland. So there are other people around us doing similar things. The Irish are used to strange foreigners turning up and trying to do things like this. But also in Ireland, Ireland is a country which became modern very recently. So there's still Irish people, especially the older Irish people, are still living like this. Mm-hmm. So it's part of that way of life as well. And more and more people are seeking a return to something like that as the world becomes more technological and urban and fast-paced, I think.
So you mentioned that you homeschool your children, right? That's a quite new idea in Romania. So what would be the strengths and weaknesses of this alternative, let's say, to the traditional education?
Well, I have to give credit to my wife, who does most of the homeschooling, for a start. I've done some of it, but she's done most of it. My wife used to be a doctor, and she left that to teach the children. Medical doctor. She was a psychiatrist, actually, and that was she was just finding it increasingly difficult to exist in that system, and we wanted to have a life change. So yes, we've homeschooled the children from a young age. It's something that in Ireland and increasingly Britain is quite common. Well, maybe not common, but it's more and more people doing it who don't necessarily agree with what the school system teaches. In our case, we wanted our children to spend more time in nature. We didn't want them to go to school and get most of their lessons taught on screens and through tablets, which is now what happens. And we wanted to be able to teach them in a way that fitted our values a lot more than the school system did. So it's been really successful. The children have enjoyed it. We've always said to them, if you want to go to school, you can, but they didn't. So the advantages of this are you can bring your children up in accordance with your values. For example, if you're Orthodox and society is quite hostile to that, maybe that's not the case in Romania, but it's maybe more the case in the West, then that can be useful. But also just, you may want to teach your children differently. You may want them not to spend their time in a building looking at a screen. You may want to give them any number of different ways to learn. So it's really advantageous. I mean, the disadvantages, it's a lot of work for you. If you want to homeschool your children, it's basically a job. So you have to really be able to teach. Not everybody wants to teach or is able to teach or has the time to teach, so it's not for everybody. That's one of the disadvantages. The other potential disadvantage is, they don't necessarily get as much contact with other children as they would if they were at school. So you have to make sure they see their friends and meet other people and things like that. And again, it will suit some children and not others. But we found it a really good way to bring up our children in line with our values and not necessarily in line with the values of the state, which are not the same thing.
In an interview, you stated that you are not active on the social media and that technology is a trap for us. Would you say that you are an anti-tech person?
I am quite instinctively anti-tech, actually. I've written a lot about this. It's very interesting because I think in some ways humans are fundamentally technological creatures. We're always creating tools. We've done that since we invented fire or language or axes. The wheel. We're never going to stop inventing things. We don't have sharp teeth or big claws, we have technology. So that's how we live in the world and that's how we've dominated the world. So in that sense, you can't stop being technological as a human being. But digital technology in particular is radical, it's revolutionary. And what we're doing now in creating the internet, in creating artificial intelligence, in moving towards this kind of transhumanist worldview in which we think we can liberate ourselves from nature is completely unprecedented. And it's very dangerous. And I think I don't have a smartphone, I don't have any social media, neither do my children. I use technology, I write on the internet, I have a car, so you can never cut yourself off from it. But I think we're going in a very dangerous direction in which we're going to create, and we've already seen this starting to happen, a grid of monitoring and control using digital technologies, which will enable states and corporations to really very carefully monitor and control their citizens and enable us to monitor and control each other and police each other's behavior. If you carry a smartphone around, you're being followed everywhere. The satellite can tell where you are. Everything you put on the internet is being used to build artificial intelligence algorithms. You can
big data.
You get big data. You can be. So it's an unprecedented situation. It makes the totalitarianism of the 20th century look quite crude, because if there was a secret police now, they don't need to come around your house. They can see what you're doing. You've given them everything already. So we have to be very, very careful with this. We just have to have, I think it's important to have an intelligent relationship with technology, really discriminating, be careful what you're doing, think about everything, don't just take on things because they look fun or useful, because things are going in a dangerous direction, and I think there's not enough intelligent understanding of what's going on, and I think it's important. You can come back to that ascetic notion again, a kind of technological ascesis would be a really useful way, I think, of looking at our relationship with that.
Would you be willing to share with us what project you're working on? Is it a secret?
Not really, no. Well, I've been writing for 2 years now, nearly. I've been writing a series of essays about what we've been talking about the state of the technological world, the machine world, what's trying to work out again what's at the root of our divorce from nature and culture and how we can live instead. So I've been writing that on the internet, and I've nearly finished it. I'm hoping to turn that into a book. And then after that, I don't know, it's interesting to me because I've written 9 books. I wasn't a Christian when I wrote any of them. So if I write any more books, I'm going to write a book as an Orthodox Christian. And I don't know what that will look like yet, actually. It'll be interesting to me to see what I write from this new perspective. So I don't know exactly what that will be, but I think I'll probably end up doing something because I can't put my pen down.
It will be interesting for us also to read it.
Well, I hope so.
Right. We're coming close to the end of our interview, so just some final thoughts for your Romanian followers and readers.
Well, so I was giving a talk here last night at the Theology Symposium, which was very intimidating for me because I'm not a theologian. But I was having a good conversation with some people afterwards, and they were saying it's very useful for them anyway, young people, young Orthodox people, and they said it's very useful and interesting to hear people from the West talking to us about Orthodoxy because it makes us realize what we have in our tradition that we take for granted. Because everyone from everywhere takes for granted everything they have in their own culture. And I will say, coming from the West, what I say to Romanian people is, I'm not going to romanticize the Orthodox Church. I'm sure it has plenty of problems like all institutions do. But at the heart of what exists in Romania, in the monasteries here, for example, and in the tradition is really valuable. And we don't have anything like this in the West. I'm always so struck by the monasteries in Romania and the fact that they have young people in them, that they're thriving. To talk about what we talked about earlier, I've seen in monasteries in the mountains these beautiful herb gardens, people using the herbs of the mountains and the plants there to create all of the potions and the lotions that they sell in the shops. A real beautiful tradition, which used to exist in the West. This was in the Middle Ages, we had all of this as well, but it's all gone now. And you still have it here. So, as I say, you don't need to put the church on a pedestal to understand that in Romania you still have this incredibly valuable thing in the Orthodox tradition, and especially in the monasteries, and you should guard that, because I think we in the West need to be shown it again. Actually, there's something that the East can bring to the West here, because we've become this very lost society. We have all the stuff in the world, but spiritually we're completely lost. And actually there's something that places like Romania can show to us, and that's one of the reasons I've ended up becoming Orthodox. So that's what I would say. I would say, guard that tradition and understand what's important in it, because if you forget that, you can lose it very, very easily, and you don't realize what you've lost until it's gone. So that's what's happened to us. So don't do the same thing.
Right. I'm quite sure that this interview has been as useful as your talk from last night. So thank you very much. And I guess we look forward to saying to you, welcome back next time when you're coming to Romania.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I need to come back. Every time I come to Romania, it reminds me of why I want to come back for longer. So thank you. It's been great.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much.